Hello and welcome to CounterPunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Hope you've had a chance to check out CounterPunch Plus, the brand new subscriber section from CounterPunch. If you were previously a subscriber to the print magazine, well, you already have CounterPunch Plus. But if you did not get that magazine before we retired it and sent it off to the island of misfit magazines, well, then you can now get Counterpunch Plus, become a subscriber, get access to all of this exclusive content that we have, including investigative pieces, essays, book reviews, film reviews, so much stuff on there. I really do recommend it because not only do you support Counterpunch, but you support independent media in this all important time, as we're facing just all of these various threats from seemingly every direction. Counterpunch Plus is a great new offer from Counterpunch. Please do go to the website and get that subscription. You can also follow my work on Patreon, patreon.com/Eric Draitzer. Okay, self-promotion out of the way. Let me get my guest on the line. Camila Escalante is with me to talk about Ecuador, Bolivia, a whole bunch of very important issues. Camila is a very important journalist that I would recommend you follow. She is with the brand new and up-and-coming news outlet Kawasyun News. Nope, let me say it again. Kaosachun News. I'm sure I got it wrong. We'll try it again, I'm sure, one more time. Camila Escalante, formerly of Telesur, based out of Ecuador and Bolivia. So much good work from her. Very happy to have you on the show. Camila, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric, on your show.
Thank you so much for all of your great work and for this really interesting news outlet out of Bolivia. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But before we can talk about your exciting projects, let's talk about what's going on in Ecuador. There's been an election, or at least a first round of an election. I'm going to assume that many people listening have not paid any attention to what's going on down there. So let's give a broad overview of the election, what happened, who are the candidates, and what was the outcome of that first round.
So we went into the election in Ecuador with about 16 candidates. And all of those candidates, except for one, represented some sort of, somewhere on the spectrum of the right wing, arguably including the Pachacuti candidate. And this is all kind of just a media war on Andres Arauz, who's, of course, the leftist candidate representing the Citizens' Revolution. And we have to say the Citizens' Revolution because they went into this election without, they have a party, and of course it's called the Union for Hope is what it's being called. And this is a completely, new construct, of course, because the party that the Citizens Revolution, Rafael Correa's party, went into the previous elections in 2017, in which Lenin Moreno won the election, was Alianza País. Alianza País still exists as a party, but he actually just resigned or left the party a few days ago. It's quite bizarre. The party brought him to power, but of course, the people who stayed were traitors to Rafael Correa because Lenin Moreno went and persecuted the main people of the main leaders of that party. Lenin Moreno persecuted, of course, former President Rafael Correa, who's in exile in Brussels, Belgium. He jailed the vice president, the elected vice president, Jorge Glass. Jorge Glass, like Lenin Moreno, were both vice presidents under Rafael Correa, and a whole slew of other people had to run to the Mexican embassy, for example, or leave the country in exile because of the political persecution. So because of that, the largest political force in the country, which we call the Citizens' Revolution, and that's what they're called in the parliament, of course, the Citizens' Revolution Bancada. They had to find another party. They were having a difficult time registering a party because, of course, the right wing and the Lenin Moreno regime wanted to make sure that they were barred from running because they knew that they had very strong prospects of winning with any candidate at the head of this party. And as well, they had a very difficult time registering the candidate, and it was, quite recently, not too long ahead of the elections, that we even knew that Andres Arauz would be able to stand. Andres Arauz was had a I guess an important position under Rafael Correa's administration. He is an economist, and he's very young and is, for all intents and purposes, a leftist. Um, However, possibly not, you know, in the vein of Hugo Chavez, but of course has pronounced himself as in favor of integration, regional integration, and of course against, IMF coercion and Lenin Moreno's IMF deal. And running against him, who everyone kind of thought would be the second place candidate for the most part, was Guillermo Lasso. And Guillermo Lasso has run three times for president. He ran in 2017, and that election, just like this election, had to go to a second round. Lenin Moreno was not able to get the votes needed to win in the first round, and it was very contentious and actually very it was a very dramatic election. Actually, it's in retrospect, people are kind of thinking that that election was small beans, but actually, uh, Guillermo Lasso's people, which are all representing kind of like the upper class, um, were trying to convulse the city of Quito and the country, and they were demanding a recount and they were demanding transparency in the second round, because Lenin Moreno won by not a very large margin ultimately. So Lasso has had his eye on the presidency. He's back again. And of course, he uh, got away with about 19% of the vote in the first round. Arauz received about 31%, and at around 19%, some tenths less than Guillermo Lasso's Yacu Perez, who represents the Patacuchi Party, which is a very important political party which has a lot of representation in the National Assembly, and which represents a lot of indigenous movement people in the country as well. That's their political project, their political party. And with 16%, there was another candidate, Javier, what's his name? Well, I can't think of his last name now, but it was a social media candidate who did very well, kind of getting the attention of young people on TikTok. And so that was a surprise as well. But of course, the winner in the end of that first round with 31% of the vote, in a very wide pool of candidates, was Andres Arauz.
Let's talk a little bit about Arauz because the generally accepted interpretation of him is basically not just a protege of Rafael Correa, but potentially his puppet, his proxy, essentially a stand in or a surrogate for Correa who cannot himself become the president. So, talk a little bit about Arauz, the perception of Arauz, perception maybe versus reality, and some of the ways in which Arauz and his political party is being targeted both inside the country and maybe by some actors from outside the country as well.
Yeah, these are the same talking points that, the right has to fall back on. And they say this in every country, that, that the new candidate represents just a protege, that someone who was hand appointed. Um, of course, Rafael Correa is supposed to be all powerful, and he points to things and he makes things happen, just by sitting in his desk in Brussels. But I mean, this has to be repeated over and over, because there's no other way to, kind of make their theory and attacks work. They have to say that, obviously Rafael Correa is built up to be a tyrant, an authoritarian, that, it was a dictatorship of 10 years. And they say this in every country. They said this about, Evo Morales, and who he was going to supposedly appoint as the new candidate for the movement towards socialism in Bolivia, even before we knew it was going to be Luis Arce. Of course, funny enough, Luis Arce um, and Andres Arauz are both very important economists. And, you know, I there was a range of people in both cases that could have been chosen to be the candidate. But at the end of the day, this is someone who is representing a very wide movement that again represents uh, the largest political movement in the country, and which has wide support in very important areas of the country, diverse areas of the country, the major cities, the coastal areas, and even some of these areas where Yaku Perez received support in this first round. Some of that support may be going to Andres Arauz, because those people will refuse to support a right wing candidate for president if their candidate does not make it to the second round. So I think a lot of people, at first within the Citizens Revolution or supporters of in the country thought it was kind of an interesting pick because he's not, one of the celebrities, let's say, of the Correistas, but of the Correistas, a lot of people, of course, are still living in exile. They're still unable to return to the country. And so that would have made it difficult for them to run as well. So this should be seen as some sort of a disadvantage to the party or to the political movement that they weren't able to run those people. Obviously, Rafael Correa can no longer run for president, and neither can anyone who's living in Mexico or in an embassy. So but by no means is it a candidate that was inevitably picked by Rafael Correa himself.
And what about the allegations that Arauz has received illicit funding from abroad? That some of the news that has come out about Arauz that may or may not be fake news emanating from either Colombia, the United States, or some combination of various other nefarious actors. Can you speak a little bit about the use of fake news, disinformation, and/or these accusations against Arauz?
Yeah, I mean, these accusations or these attempts to try to link a leftist anywhere in the region, which would be, all of Latin America, to you know, to narco trafficking or to a guerrilla organization are just, extremely forced. And, it's just a repeat formula that we're seeing over and over in every single country. It exists here in Bolivia. Bolivia is a landlocked country in the middle of South America, which, has particular neighbors, but largely has a lot of, Amazon and forests and is quite far away from Colombia. And they tried to say the same things about links of Colombian guerrillas to, politicians here, and tried to make assertions about narco trafficking, which, even by the standards of the USDEA, don't exist here on any level, compared to Peru or Colombia itself. So they were trying to say that based on a story that came out right before the elections, a story that was written by a reporter of Revista Semana magazine in Colombia, that they had information that a commander of the ELN, now deceased, had given a loan to Andres Arauz. And this is, of course, their timeline for this was before Andres Arauz was even confirmed as a candidate. And, it just follows the same line that Lenin Moreno has been pushing for years. I mean, essentially since the beginning of his presidency, that that the leftists of the country, of the people who were of Alianza País, um, the Correistas, have links to guerrillas in Colombia. But of course, he was under that same administration. If there was any sort of corruption at all, or links to any organizations, I guess he would have been a part of it, wouldn't he? But yeah, it's just it's just like a little bit ridiculous, and it ties in with like the xenophobia and racism that we see. Like there's a lot of people in Venezuela who, when they're denouncing Nicolas Maduro and saying that they don't recognize him as president anymore. They say that he's a Colombian citizen. Similarly, in Ecuador, people try to offend people by saying that they're Colombians, to try to say that they're part of some other group. And it's just, it obviously appeals to a certain, sector of the population who is drawn to those sorts of xenophobic attacks on people who've had to move to Ecuador because of, displacement and, really horrible things having to do with the conflict in Colombia, and just trying to appeal to those fears.
Can you take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about Yaku Perez and the very close finish in the first round of the election? His allegations of fraud, any evidence that's been brought forward, and where that all stands now?
Yeah. So it was, I think it was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people, because Yaku Perez probably wasn't scoring as high in those voter intention surveys. But of course, as is the case in a lot of places, those surveys are not, um, very accurate in certain parts of the country. They have difficulty conducting their work, or they deliberately don't go to certain areas to receive that information. And so, what we saw with him receiving almost as many votes as Guillermo Lasso received is, he just received a massive block vote from the grassroots of the organization he's a part of. And so he's a part of, he represents the Pachakutik political party, which at its base is the Konaye um, indigenous movement. And these people, held their own internal process. This was very contentious. Two other candidates within Konaye who represent much more of the grassroots had much I guess they had much more of a chance of winning according to their own internal polling, their own indicators. But for a number of different reasons, they were kind of like strong armed by the political arm of their movement. And Yaku Perez became the candidate. So um, I think I think despite that, a lot of people saw that Yaku Perez was not their preferred candidate from Konaye, or from the bases representing them. He was the prefect of Azwai, a province of Ecuador. So he is a politician. He does know how to swoon people, but he wasn't the preferred candidate. But despite that, I think people, were very that people are militants in the same way that they are here in Bolivia. Once again, not it's your preferred leader doesn't always become the candidate, but people still believe in their political project, and they would always rather support their least favorite within their own movement than support someone else, especially someone of the right wing, or someone that they've had a rough relationship with, in this case Correismo. And so it was a bit of a surprise if we're following the polling, but it's not a surprise that this is a large uh, social movement, the indigenous movement in Ecuador, and that they voted together as a bloc. And if you look at the places in which he won, or where he did well, I mean, he did extremely well. I mean, he won, between, let's say, 40 to 50% of the vote in certain areas. And this is between all of the candidates. So, yeah, he received that kind of block vote. And so I do think that even they were a little bit surprised. They, meaning his campaign, his party, were that surprised that they would fare so well, and then they realized that there was something worth fighting for there. But as the votes continued to come in, and of course we saw that the final votes were coming from the province of Guayas, which is a large province, and it is the province with the city of Guayaquil, which is the second city of Ecuador, which has been in the news for the last year, of course. Guayaquil was the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak. And it is a coastal province, and all coastal provinces have essentially always favored Correísmo. And although Lasso has traditionally had a lot of support, there is a large, following of the right wing there in Guayaquil. They probably lost a great deal of support because of the mishandling of the coronavirus outbreak in the country. And so ultimately, those votes came in very late. And, I think the parties themselves, the candidates themselves, were able to make predictions based on which areas of the countries remained to be counted, in the vast majority of which were in Guayas. And they knew that the biggest winner out of those final votes, those final tally sheets to be counted, would be Andres Arauz, and that to a lesser extent, Guillermo Lasso would be receiving a big push as well to throw him over that threshold and pass Yaku, and of course secure his place in the second round. And Yaku knew this himself, and so at that point he began denouncing that this was going to happen, that he had been in the lead through the count, as the tally sheets were being counted throughout those hours and days, and he knew that Guillermo Lasso would surpass him. But geographically, it makes sense. This is the same sort of scenario in some ways as we saw in Bolivia, that the rural vote comes in. I mean, it's a little different, but there it's the case that the rural vote comes in last, and the rural vote supports the mass. And so they would always, just about always get a spike at the end. And in this case, the two front runners, or the two who are proceeding to the next round, did get their spike. Yaku Perez did not get his spike. He lost, and to the point where he was trailing by 30,000 points, which in some ways may seem close, may seem far, but he's been trying to produce a number of tally sheets that demonstrate some sort of irregularities. But the problem with that is, for one, he's producing tally sheets that don't have anything to do with the presidential race. They're tally sheets having to do with the other races, the National Assembly, and that as far as the CNE has permitted the revision of some of them, that the numbers haven't changed drastically.
And if you could just take a minute and explain for us the moves that were made by the Attorney General, some of the other high-ranking government officials recently that caused an uproar and potentially, raising accusations of meddling in the election results.
Yeah, well, like I said, that Semana Santa article came out quite recently, just before the elections, and it was just some person, a reporter, and she might have gotten this information directly from the U.S. State Department. She might have, someone might have, it might have been strategically placed for her to encounter. I'm not really sure. Obviously, it was disproven um, in one way or another, but the the attorney general in Ecuador solicited that evidence that supposedly uh, the the reporter had, and the, I'm trying to English things, the attorney general in Colombia had now possession of. And of course, the guy jumped on a presidential plane, I believe, and took a visit. This attorney general of Colombia visited Quito to hand deliver those documents on a USB drive, and so with such urgency. And so, of course, the criticisms of that have been that all sorts of well, first of all, wild crimes take place in Colombia. There's just a very high rate of massacres that take place there. There's an ongoing conflict there. There's a lot of killings by paramilitaries, and there's also been some crimes that involved Ecuador. For example, 3 journalists in Ecuador, I believe in 2018, were killed by a irregular group that was Colombian, um, by the Ecuadorian Colombian border. Um, and so things like that have happened. And at no point did the uh, Ecuadorian state go to such lengths to protect its own citizens and gather and receive that, um, the information and evidence that they had in Colombia, and collaborate on this level to try to ensure that there was justice for those victims and families. And so it's kind of absurd that this was able to move so quickly. And it's just so obvious. And this is, of course, at the same time when the media is just repeating these, these tales about cooperation between guerrillas and this party. And I mean, the thing is that the beyond how just ridiculous it would be in any shape or form, Andres Arauz, again, he is a social democrat. He's not someone who would have any sort of, it's inconceivable that he would even have relations with people like that. Is all, it's like, I don't know how else to say it, but this is someone who literally um, collaborated with, as a senior fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington. This is someone who's spent years of his life in the US and the global north. And he really just, it's very difficult to draw out a map by which this would be even possible for him to receive such funding.
But
So
didn't they try to seize data? I'm sorry, didn't they try to seize data from the Electoral Commission and actually get their hands on the raw vote tallies?
yeah, so uh, both the attorney general and the comptroller wanted to intervene uh, with the TSC or the CNE. Sorry, getting my countries confused here, but the National Electoral Council, and conduct their own review. Of course, even the board members of the National Electoral Council themselves has said that they can only actually audit the system when the entire process is complete. That is, after the second round is complete. And so they weren't able to advance on that. But at the end of the day, they were going off of just the accusations by the third place candidate, um, and with very little to go off of. And it's just very unprecedented that they would move so quickly, uh, based on just claims and no real evidence. So, and not follow any type of a process. It seemed like the president of the CNE had lost control of the situation, was kind of just leaving things open, just changing, going in one direction and the other every couple of hours. She, of course, was hand appointed by the Lenin Moreno regime, and was one of the people who was favored to head the CNE by the oligarchy of the country, and is also from Pachacutic, the party of Yaku Perez.
With the time that we have remaining, I want to focus on what seems to be one of the primary issues for the left to engage with when it comes to not just Ecuador, but maybe Latin America broadly speaking, and that is the divide, maybe real, maybe imagined, maybe some combination of the two, between indigenous and environmental concerns on the one hand and economic development in the form of energy, mining, extractivist technology, and development model on the other. And so the first question is this divide really as sharp as we might read in some of the Western press? Number one, and then number two, the extent to which this divide is real, what does it tell us about the precarious situation on the left in Latin America?
It's an absolutely false divide, which does not exist. It's completely forged, and that benefits the likes of the people on the right wing and the people who are trying to steal power away from the most popular forces of the left in the continent, just 2 days ago was the anniversary of the killing of Berta Caceres in Honduras. And if you'll see, the people who have honored her life and memory and who have uh, committed to seeking justice for Berta Caceres have been indigenous people, have been environmentalists, have been leftists, and people associated with ALBA, people associated with Venezuela and Bolivia and regional integration and the social movements that make up ALBA. And so it is absolutely unbelievable that now, it's 5 years later, that people are trying to forge the story about a division between one kind of a left and another kind of left. It's just not true. There are conferences and continental gatherings and meetings of indigenous peoples, and of social movements where all of these people that we're talking about come together. And it is no different in Ecuador, nor is it different in Bolivia. And at the end of the day, we just saw on November 11th, 2020, here in Bolivia, in Chimore at the airport, when Evo made his final return home, he came on stage. Sitting beside him, on either side of him, were two the most important leaders of CONAIE, which are Jaime Vargas and Leonidas Iza and Andres Arauz. And he brought them together. And of course, they came, Andres Arauz came because he was in the country as a guest for the inauguration of Luis Arce a couple of days prior. The CONAIE delegation also came to La Paz prior to the events with Evo, and they attended Luis Arce inauguration as well. But they sat together at the same table uh, after they joined Evo on stage, in a celebration that took place in the evening with music and dance and food. And they've said that it just is what it was. Evo just had an event, and that they are allies and friends and comrades of Evo, and it was nothing more than that. But of course, we know through the actions that have been taken by CONAIE as an organization and by the grassroots, and those anti-IMF protests that took place, the October uprising that was largely led by the indigenous movement, but of course was a multi-sector uprising that included students and union workers from cities and a lot of other organizations, but was led by the indigenous movement. We saw what their actions were. We saw what they said, what their talking points were, what their demands were. And these are people who, at the bases and within, certain leaders, are fundamentally leftists, and that they don't see, they don't have so different of an ideology as the Rafael Correa left. And so this is a completely invented thing, because at one point or another, there were some clashes that are, that need to be addressed between Rafael Correa and his administration and CONAIE, and that they denounced him for some of the things that took place under his management of the country, whereby there were some offenses to some of the indigenous peoples on their territories, very specific things that happened. However, that doesn't change that fundamentally the things that people are demanding, for example, that Leonidas and some of the local authorities are demanding that they be able to purchase their own Sputnik V vaccines from Russia, and holding a meeting with the Russian embassy because they're tired of the corruption within the right-wing regime of Lenin Moreno, and they see that this problem, of this complete failure to deal with this public health crisis by this government, is just going to continue under Guillermo Lasso. And I think that there are people among their ranks who believe that this could continue as well under Yaku Perez, and that when they are given an option between right and left, that they know that they will have to, or that it would be perhaps at least more preferable among a lot of the bases to support a leftist candidate and try to fight and work with Andrés Arauz and his administration.
One of the reasons why this issue is so at the center, certainly for me, in my thinking about this issue and in thinking about Latin America generally, is that those of us who follow U.S. imperialism and the machinations of U.S. imperialism know that environmental issues are one of the critical, fulcrums, choke points at which U.S. soft power is able to exert its influence. We've seen this in various parts in Central America. We've seen it in South America. We've seen it in other parts of the world as well. Sometimes it comes in the form of NGOs and grants. Sometimes it comes in the form of individuals who are involved in those movements. Maybe sometimes it's the National Endowment for Democracy or whatever it may be. But the question of a divide on the left between environmental concerns and indigenous concerns versus economic development, real or manufactured, is absolutely one of the directions from which imperialism seems to be targeting the Latin American left.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, one of the things that we have to realize is that the right in Latin America and the forces of neoliberalism have only been able to come to power in recent years through coups and persecution and through infiltration. And in Ecuador, they returned to power, the right returned to power by infiltrating the Alianza País party, which was the party of Rafael Correa, which Lenin Moreno destroyed. And in the case of Pachacuti, this person who came to power as the candidate with links to the U.S. embassy, that he also, sort of had to hijack the entire process to be able to, show up on the ballot in the elections. So I think it's really important to realize that this has been a complete manipulation of the process from the outset, and that you know this process is going to, there's going to be somewhat of, people predict, a rupture in the coming days. The second round of the election is going to take place on April 11th, but tomorrow, which is Friday, March 5th, the Cotopaxi movement, the indigenous and campesino movement of Cotopaxi, which is the movement that is led by Leonidas Isa Salazar, will be holding a meeting with its bases, and they will be concretely deciding what they want to do going forward to the March 10th meeting of CONAIE's in-person ampliado, or mass meeting. And so in that meeting, the most important item will be deciding how they're going to proceed collectively going into the second round. And they've already decided that this individual, who has acted as an individual in his own interests, this is the leaders of CONAIE and a lot of the bases themselves who are saying this, that this person has acted on their own, is not making it to the second round, regardless of what claims that they have made about fraud or demand for transparency. That it's just over and done with. And it is a two-man race between Lasso, the rightist candidate, and Andrés Arauz. And they will have to decide whether they want to. There are more than two options. They have also considered, whether they're just going to cast a null vote and, go to the polls but not support one or the other candidate. That is also a possibility. But they have said time and time again, the leaders of the movement have said that they will never in any circumstances support the right. And I think that, support for the right, they might come to the decision that casting a null or blank vote is support for the right. And they may try to push for some sort of support to Arauz. That's going to be very tricky to try to articulate to the bases and to the Pachacuti structure, because they've spent a bit of time trying to distinguish themselves officially from Rafael Correa's people, but I do think that that their inclination right now, from what it seems like, is that they do not want to risk having another 4 years of Lenin Moreno in the form of Guillermo Lasso.
In just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask you to be as brief as you can you give us an update on the situation of COVID in Ecuador? As you already noted, Ecuador was one of the global hotspots in the early part of this pandemic in the city of Guayaquil. So, what is the situation with COVID now? What is the vaccine rollout? How does the country look?
Well, during the height of the first wave, Lenin Moreno's administration actually let go a bunch of doctors from the public health system, and they have been one of the countries which has been slowest to get their hands on vaccines. That, of course, has to do with the fact that um, there's this reactionary push against cooperation with Russia and China, two of the only uh, providers of vaccines that probably would have been able to reach Ecuador in a reasonable, time frame. And so they've been very slow about getting their hands on vaccines. Then there was the whole, what they're calling corruption scandal with his latest minister of health, who resigned on Friday officially and then boarded a plane on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. directly to Miami, arriving at 10 a.m. And he has fled justice. He knew that people were so angry that he was going to have to probably face prison time, so he departed. And so essentially, in the small amount of time that they were able to get their hands on some vaccines, friends and family and whoever else, whatever partners were prioritized, and they weren't getting to the people who needed it most. And this is, of course, following all the images of bodies laying out in the streets and people just dying outside of hospitals all across Guayaquil, but also in other areas of the country. I don't know what the figures are now, because, of course, I'm kind of in another world right now, which is Bolivia. But people are really angry, and this works to the advantage of Andres Arauz, who is holding talks with Argentina and finding other ways of securing vaccines. He has his own ways of getting vaccines. He's been, focusing on that sort of diplomacy, you know, before even becoming president, and is trying to ensure those things. And so I think people are going to really consider that as well when they return to the polls in April.
Final question, since we're just about out of time. I just would ask you to give us an update on the situation in Bolivia. That's where you are currently. Several months ago, we did a whole episode about everything that went down in Bolivia, of course, everything that happened from the coup on forward, and then, of course, Arce's electoral dominance, his landslide victory. So ever since then, I guess it's been, what are we talking now, 4 months since then. What has happened since then? What are the significant things that we should be looking for in terms of the near term, medium term, long term for Bolivia?
Well, this Sunday in Bolivia, we're going to regional and local elections. That's the elections for governor, mayors, and councilors. It's really important, of course, because this is the opposition's opportunity to try to gain control of some regions of the country. And it's also the masses' opportunity to consolidate power in a more concrete way now that they won, overwhelmingly with 55% voting for Lucho Arce, while also winning majorities in both houses on October 18th. So it's been extremely contentious um, inside the country. When we post online, myself, my colleagues, and on Saskatchewan News, when we post about some of these things that are going on with someone being summoned over a charge, you know, everyone's or someone from the Janine Añez regime, everyone in the exterior, the international community, their response is always, why is that person still free? Why are they walking around free? Why are they not in jail? Why have the people who committed all of these crimes, the massacres, and persecuted people within Bolivia during the coup, why have they not seen jail time? And this is exactly what the conversation is on the ground in Bolivia. Everybody says this every day. That is like online, on Facebook pages. If you go to a rally, people are very angry. People are very much pushing the government. They are trying to figure out if the problem is the they say the minister of government, which is like the interior minister, if he's being too soft. Of course, in the case of the Jeanine Áñez regime, the interior minister was Arturo Murillo. He was persecuting people widely. People were in jail for the whole of the coup, only to be released afterwards. Um, so people are wondering if that guy's being too soft. They're going after the departmental prosecutors and um, and other and other officials and saying, why aren't these people being persecuted? So this is a huge topic within the country. People want to see they want to see their officials coming down on these people, because in this election that's taking place on Sunday, some of the key people from the Janine Áñez regime, including her herself, are running as candidates. She's running as governor for the department of Beni, where she's from. And of course, Luis Fernando Camacho is running for governor of Santa Cruz, and other people are running. One of her ministers is running for the mayor of La Paz. He's being accused of sexual harassment of women. Just people just think that they're scum, but at the same time, they happen to have very large followings in their localities. So they're a really popular person in their city or town, or in the department. In the case of Janine Áñez in the department of Beni, they have very high electoral prospects. So this is a lot of people. It's a very heated time, actually, and it's kind of weird because we report in English for a foreign audience, but it's it's kind of hard to hype up an election that really is so internal. But apart from that, we're also seeing new attempts at destabilization. So the doctors who work at private clinics have gone on strike in the height of the COVID-19 outbreak here. And so they're refusing to work because these people, unlike the vast majority of working class Bolivians who have to go to work every single day and stand outside and sell something or make something or drive a taxi or whatever it is, doctors receive salaries no matter what, and they're refusing to work. Their public hospital or public clinic side of their work, whereas they're still probably engaging in their for-profit medical services, of course. And so while the government is trying to strengthen the public health system, this is something that Evo Morales did during the whole of his term, Lucho Arce is having to further that because, of course, we're dealing with the coronavirus. And so they're, obviously just bringing in all the vaccines. This will be free of charge. Everybody is qualified to receive one. No one will be discriminated against. But the doctors want to keep things as private as possible. They want to be able to benefit or profit off of these services. And so they're staging strikes, right as we're approaching elections. And so there's a really hostile environment here. And of course, Evo Morales had to deal with these same doctors. It's not all doctors. It's a particular, doctor organizations that are, that were in opposition to Evo Morales, and they're using the power that they have in the country to strike against this government as well. They also, of course, these people are against the return of the Cuban doctors, which had to leave when the dictatorship came to power. They're trying to prevent them from returning, of course, because the Cuban doctors would be, a part of the public health system, and it would, again, make it more difficult for people to profit off of health services. of course, just another thing that happened that was really noteworthy was that Lucho Arce actually and the Central Bank of Bolivia did return that $350 million loan to the IMF. And it did cost some millions of dollars to the Bolivian state, but not nearly as much as it would have, of course, had they held on to it and spent it the way Janine Agnes would have wanted them to. And so that, of course, shows, the kind of administration and economic policy that Arce is running. People had their doubts about Lucho Arce, and they kind of thought that he was, not as revolutionary of a leader as Evo Morales. But of course, he's proving by his actions that he's following the same course.
Final question. Can you just, in like 2 or 3 minutes, just tell us a little bit about Calsachuan News, the genesis of this news project, and what you hope to achieve?
So, Kasashma News, we launched on May 6th of last year, which is during the coup. And so we had always wanted, well, when I say we, I mean, myself and my colleague, Ollie Vargas, and some of our friends and colleagues who are kind of bilingual as well. We wanted to do a media project for a while, kind of just like highlighting the internal struggles of Bolivia, news in Bolivia for the English speaking world, and just kind of like showing, highlighting largely the mass and like the different social movements that are represented within this political party. And so then, the coup took place, and this was, we just had to launch it like in the middle of everything that was going on. And so we are based in the Tropico of Cochabamba in a small rural town. It's really just the jungle. But we are part of a radio station, which is Radio Calsachuan Coca, which is the official station of the Six Federations. The Six Federations is a massive rural agricultural workers union there in the Tropico. The Tropico is just this large region of the Department of Cochabamba where, known for traditional coca production as well as agriculture. And so that's where we're based. So it's kind of like, in some ways, we are in an English version, an English service of Radio Kasachwan Coca, but it's a little bit different, of course, because we're kind of outward facing, and the radio station deals with a lot of issues that are very much local. And so I think, we just started extremely small, but, we were really passionate about reporting on Bolivia before the coup took place. And we were using every platform, at our disposal to do so. And so at the time, I was, a presenter and producer of our newscast at Telesur English. And, every other position I've done there. And I always tried to kind of insert the news coverage of Bolivia into our newscast and everything I did. And that was, very successful. And had I not done that, obviously there would have been a whole lot less coverage. And I was able to interview Ollie on our programs and when we were both there. And so, yeah, this is just like this has been an opportunity for us to spotlight Bolivia and the struggles here. And of course, the resistance against the coup. Now that the Bolivian people were able to defeat the coup in such a short period of time through the ballot box, but obviously through their popular mobilization and the national strikes and blockades that took place in July, August. Now this is just, we have not reached the launch yet. We feel like all of that was kind of like the what is it, like the gestation period. We will be launching actually in the coming months a much larger project, and we will have a website and a whole lot of other features. And of course, we are seeking a lot of support and funding for that. But regardless of what kind of support we have, this is something that has always been grassroots and initiative based, and that we'll continue to do whether or not we have the means to do as much as we would like to do. And of course, because of what happened and the circumstances in Bolivia. We were always focused on Bolivia, but we have a lot of knowledge and experience reporting in other places, myself in Venezuela and Cuba. Um, and of course, we want to kind of draw a larger picture of the scenario in our region, and that includes all of these integrational projects, that includes ALBA, that includes all of these different things that Evo Morales is kind of at the forefront of, which is retaking these projects that had kind of quieted down, that weren't being as articulated anymore as they were under Hugo Chavez. So Hugo Chavez not only was one of the minds behind all of these integrational projects, including SALAG, or SALAC, UNISUR, and Telesur, etc. But he also was bringing together social movements of our continent under the banner of ALBA, and this is something that Evo Morales and the Secretary General of ALBA, who is also Bolivian right now, is Sasha Laurenti, and of course, all of the Venezuelans who are a big part of ALBA are trying to relaunch now, is bringing together social movements once again as we, proceed to overcome COVID-19. We'll be able to have, in-person meetings again, and, just, try and begin to organize continentally on a continental level once again. This is a hugely important time for our continent. These forces of the left were coming together in a very strong way during this period of the let's say like early 2000s, with Evo and Fidel and Chavez and Cristina and others at the forefront. And this is starting to take place now, and we're seeing, a leftist wave on a political level in governments coming to power, but also on the social movement level, and that's something we want to cover.
Well, we're very happy to have another news source of this kind, one that can give these kind of insights. I would just direct everybody to Kawsachwan News. That's on Twitter at Kawsachwan News. I'm going to spell it Kawsachun, Kawsachwan News on Twitter. We'll be looking forward to the website, the launch of the new project, etc. You should follow Camila as well on Twitter. Camila Escalante is at Prensa Camila and at Camila Press. Camila is a face we know from Telesur, and you've heard her here with excellent analysis of the situation in Ecuador and in Bolivia. Camila, thanks for coming and talking to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And of course, Kawsachwan News is also on Facebook. And like I said, we'll be launching our website quite soon, but we have a YouTube as well. And most of our stuff will be found on Twitter.
That's great. Thank you so much, listeners. Thank you so much for your continued support, for supporting CounterPunch. Get your CounterPunch Plus subscriptions, and we will talk again real soon.